Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 27 September 2019. And the articles that we will be discussing today have been displayed on this screen. So let us start our discussion. Now, this article on page number 1 is related to Prime Minister meeting the head of Iran, and both of them have discussed about the Chabahar port of Iran, which is strategically very important for India, and India has also invested in the development of this port. Now, both the premiers were meeting on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly meeting. So, this will fall under General Studies paper 2 under the topic International Relations. So, in this article, let us try to understand the strategic importance of this Chabahar port. Now, as you can see in this map here, the Chabahar port is located in the Gulf of Oman in the Arabian Sea. And that is why this location of this port becomes strategically very important to India. Now, the first thing that India wants to achieve by developing this port is that it wants to bypass the Pakistan. And this will allow India to access the landlocked country of Afghanistan and also other Central Asian nations. Now, regarding accessing Afghanistan by bypassing Pakistan, India is trying to develop a railway line which connects the Chabahar port with Zahedan in Iran. And from there, India will connect this Zahedan to Zarang by a road link. Further, India has already developed the Zarang to Dilaram highway in the Afghanistan. So this will provide India the access to Afghanistan from the Chabahar port directly. And as we all know that Afghanistan has been facing the issue of terrorism, etc. And that is why such investments of India in Afghanistan are important for India. Further, China is developing the Gwadar port of Pakistan, and that is why India wants to develop this Chabahar port, which is in close proximity to the Gwadar port, in order to counter the influence of China in the Indian Ocean region. Besides, you should note that this area is known as the Persian Gulf, and almost 20% of the global crude oil passes through this Persian Gulf. So, in order to secure the oil which is transported from this Persian Gulf, India wants its presence in the Chabahar port. And by doing this, it will be important for India's energy security because India is mainly dependent on imports of crude oil for its energy security. So the first importance of this port is that it will help India in bypassing Pakistan and accessing the landlocked Afghanistan. Secondly, it will help India in countering the influence of China in the Indian Ocean region because this port is located very close to the Gwadar port which is being developed by China in Pakistan. Further, it is important for India's energy security because India depends upon oil imports for its energy requirements. And majority of the oil globally passes through this Persian Gulf. And that is why by being present at the Chabahar port, India wants to secure its oil imports. Now, another major important initiative which India wants to secure is the International North-South Corridor. And here you should note that in order to access the Central Asian countries, Russia and Europe, India mainly relies presently on the Suez Canal. However, if this International North-South Corridor is completed, India will have an alternative route to access the Russian territory and also the Central Asian nations of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, etc. So in this regard, this International North-South Corridor will be linked with Mumbai to Bandar Abbas port in Iran. From there, it will pass through the Caspian Sea, and from there, it will be connected on the land surface in the Russian and the European territories. Now, here, India and Iran are planning that this international north-south corridor will also be connected with the Chabahar port. And that is how the Chabahar port will also be one of the important points for connecting the international north-south corridor, and which will be important for India because it will give India the access to the mainland Eurasia or the European and the Asian countries which are landlocked and do not have direct access to the sea. So that is why this is also one of the important strategic importance of the Chabahar port for India. So all these points make the Chabahar port very important for India. And here you should note that this port has received waiver from the US sanctions despite US imposing sanctions on Iran after the nuclear deal was suspended. And if you notice, in the year 2017, there was a question in the preliminary examination related to the importance of developing Chabahar port by India. And you should notice that the correct answer was that India will not depend on Pakistan for access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. So these are few important points related to the Chabahar port, and with this let's move to the next article. This article on page number 13 talks that the United Nations Security Council has allowed Hafiz Saeed, who is a terrorist in Pakistan, the banking access. And as the news reads further, the decision is in response to a request made by Pakistan according to a notification from the 1267 committee. Now, this 1267 committee is known as the Sanctions Committee of the United Nations Security Council. And this Sanctions Committee was established by a resolution in the year 1999, and this resolution was known as the 1267 resolution. And accordingly, the Sanctions Committee is also known as the 1267 Committee. And this committee imposed a ban and air embargo, and it also froze the assets of the Taliban. Further, this Sanctions Committee has imposed various sanctions and has blacklisted the terrorist of Pakistan, which is Hafiz Saeed. So in this regard, this will fall under the General Studies paper 2 under the topic International Relations. So in this background, let us look at what are the implications of blacklisting a person by the UNSC 1267 committee or the Sanctions Committee, and what are the basics of the Sanction Committee. Further, in today's PDF, you will be provided with the background of how this Sanctions Committee has evolved in the past and what are the various important resolutions that have been passed. So in this background, let us look at what are the implications of blacklisting a terrorist by the UNSC's Sanctions Committee and what are the main functions of this Sanctions Committee. So here you should note that a blacklisted person is subjected to a travel ban, freezing of assets and an arms embargo. Now regarding freezing of assets, you should note that all the UN member governments across the globe immediately freeze the funds, financial assets or any economic resources that come under direct or indirect ownership of the designated individual, which means that all the financial or economic assets of the blacklisted person are frozen by the member nations of the United Nations. Further, regarding travel ban, you should note that the entry or transit of this person is also banned by the members of United Nations. Further, an arms embargo is also imposed on the concerned blacklisted person. So under this, all the member countries are directed to block the channels that might directly or indirectly facilitate the sale of arms to such person. So here we should understand that the blacklisting of a terrorist mainly deals with the travel ban for that person, freezing of economic assets of that person, and also an embargo or restriction on the sale or purchase of arms to that person. And after the person has been blacklisted, the member countries of the United Nations impose all these bans on the concerned person. Now, besides a ban on the travel and the freezing of assets, non-material support is also banned by the UNSC under the blacklisting of a person. And here you should note that any non-material support in the form of technical advice, assistance or logistic support or training is also banned for the member countries. So the member countries of the UN cannot provide technical advice, assistance or logistic support to that person. Now after this, let us understand what are the key aspects of the Sanctions Committee of the United Nations Security Council. Now regarding the Sanctions Committee of the United Nations Security Council, you should note that the Security Council can take action to maintain or restore international peace and security under the Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. And the sanction measures have been provided under the Article 41 of the UN Charter. And these sanctions are different from the use of armed forces in restoring the international peace and security. Now, these sanctions include a range of sanctions, including economic, trade sanctions, or targeted sanctions like arms embargo, travel bans, and financial and diplomatic restrictions. And these sanctions are generally resorted to when the peace has been threatened and diplomatic efforts fail to find a solution. So, in such a scenario, The United Nations Security Council tries to impose sanctions on either persons or entities. Now, the syllabus of General Studies Paper 2 mentions about important international institutions, agencies, fora, their structure and mandate. And in this line, in the year 2017, a question was asked related to the UN Economic and Social Council, or the ECOSOC. So similarly, you can expect a question on the Sanctions Committee of United Nations Security Council, as it has been in news in this year. So that is why you should go through this question from your mains examination point of view. And with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, this article on page number 11 is in form of an interview with former Chief Statistician of India, Pranab Sen, and Chief Economist at the Aditya Birla Group, Ajit Ranade. And they have discussed various measures for bringing Indian economy out of this slowdown. So this will fall under General Studies Paper 3 under the topic Economic Development. Now, previously also, various articles which have come in the newspaper have been discussed regarding the economic slowdown. And how effective are the steps which have been taken by the Government of India in this regard have also been analyzed. So in this article, first we will try to understand what all points have been raised by these authors. And after that, we will revise one of the important articles that appeared in the Hindu newspaper related to the effectiveness of the steps which are taken by the Government of India. So after going through the main points, we will revise that video once again so that you can have a good perspective of how effective are the steps taken by the Government of India and what all needs to be done in order to arrest this economic slowdown. So overall, the authors in this article have argued that to pull India out of the current economic slowdown, the government should increase its spending and make all pending payments which are pending with the Government of India. And these would include giving of GST refunds and also export refunds. And secondly, the government's focus should be on revamping the MGNREGA to put more money in the hands of rural consumers, which is likely to increase the demand in the Indian economy. And as we all know that, one of the major reasons for this economic slowdown is the fall in the consumption expenditure or the effective demand in the Indian economy. Now, the authors have highlighted that Indian GDP is witnessing a slowdown for the past 5 quarters. And the reason for this slowdown is not the lack of supply, but it is the fall in demand or the consumption expenditure. So the most suitable and long-term solution would be that there should be increase in the private investment demand in the Indian economy. And this private investment demand has presently been affected by various factors. For example, increasing NPAs in the banking sector and fall in the profit margin for the private sector companies. However, to increase the private investment demand, the focus of the government should be on improving the investment sentiment in the Indian economy. Now, how this investment sentiment can be improved? So, the authors have suggested that the government should focus on trade facilitation. Further, the government should also focus on ease of doing business. And finally, the present delay in the GST refunds should be done away with, and there should be timely payments for the GST refunds. And also, the government should focus on managing the exchange rate, which will increase the export competitiveness of the Indian exports. Now, although the authors have argued that in the long term, the increase in demand depends upon the private sector spending. However, in the near term, the government should increase its spending, and that will improve the consumption expenditure or demand in the Indian economy. Now, as we all know that when the government increases its spending, there are fears of fiscal deficit. So how to look at this challenge of fiscal deficit which is being posed by increased government spending? Now, the present fiscal deficit of the government stands at about 3.4 to 3.5%. However, the authors have suggested that this fiscal deficit figure is a repressed one and does not show out the true picture of the government's fiscal deficit scenario. Now, why is the fiscal deficit figure which is being shown by the government repressed one? And this is mainly because the government has been artificially showing this fiscal deficit on a lesser note. And this is mainly because the government has not been paying its dues. And these dues include the government's refunds, for example, the GST refunds, the government's liability of export credit refund, And also the government has shown reluctance in releasing the funds which it had committed in the budget. For example, the latest tranche of the PM Kisan Yojana has not been released, and under which we know that the government was to release 2000 rupees installments amounting to a total of 6000 per year, and that amount has not been released by the government. And this shows that because the government is not paying its dues properly, the current fiscal deficit figures are repressed in nature, or they do not show the actual scenario of the fiscal deficit of the government. Now, as the government is not timely repaying its dues to the stakeholders, this is leading to a locking up of the capital. And as this capital gets locked up, the private investment decreases significantly. Also, the government's lack of releasing the funds for the important schemes like PM Kisan Yojana decreases the rural expenditure. So, in this regard, the authors have suggested that the government should quickly release all its pending payments and should not worry about the fiscal deficit in the near short term. This is because by locking up these dues, the government is also indirectly impacting the private sector investment and the demand. Further, as we know that the government has recently announced that it will link the Manrega wages with that of CPI, agricultural labor, or the rural CPI, or whichever shows more inflation. So in this regard, the authors have analyzed that the effectiveness of this step will depend upon the way in which the Manrega is being implemented. And because of the reluctance of the central government in paying up the funds of Manrega to the state governments, the authors have said that over the past 5 years or so, the confidence of the state governments has been eroding significantly because of the lack of payments by the central government in this regard. And that is why the state governments have not been showing up their commitments towards the Narega. Also, the authors have analyzed that over the years, the Manrega has become a supply-based system from a demand-based system which was envisaged in the original act. So the original act has provided that anybody who demands work should be provided within a period of 15 days. However, as the central government is not releasing funds on time, the state governments are showing reluctance in providing the Manrega employment. And as the state governments are not capable of providing the employment to these people, they are releasing the employment opportunities very slowly. So in this regard, the authors have said that it has become a supply-based system from an earlier envisaged demand-based system. However, to make the Manrega effective, the authors have suggested that the focus of the government should be on effectively introducing the social audits on the lines of Andhra Pradesh and the Rajasthan. Further, the authors have analyzed that one of the biggest structural features of Indian economy right now is a massive drop in the female labor force participation. And in this regard, the authors have suggested that the female labor force participation in the past 10 years has dropped by nearly 10%. So the authors have suggested that there should be a 10-year or 15-year tax-free income for women, which means that there should be zero income tax for all women. So in this regard, the authors have suggested that such a step will increase the consumption expenditure and would also encourage paid jobs for women. Further, the effect of demonetization has been adversely impacting the unorganized sector. And this unorganized sector has been hit now for a long time, which almost employs 70% of the working population of India. So the authors have suggested that unless the rural incomes are revived, the consumer demand is not going to grow. So in this regard, the rural wages, which used to grow at about 10 to 15% a year, have grown barely 1% in the last few years, and this has been the impact of demonetization. And this has adversely affected the rural purchasing power, and which is showing up in the lack of demand in the Indian economy. So these are few suggestions and the analysis of the problem of economic slowdown by the authors. Now after this, let us revise from a previous article where we have discussed the steps or the effectiveness of the steps which have been taken by the government to arrest the economic slowdown. So presently the Indian economy is facing an economic slowdown, and which is clearly evident from the declining GDP growth rate. Now this decline in GDP has been attributed to both the supply factors as well as the demand factors. Now, these supply side factors include the lack or declining investment levels in the Indian economy, and the demand side factors include the declining consumption expenditure in India. So, in this context, the economic revival would require the government to focus on both the demand side as well as the supply side, which means that the government needs to boost the consumption expenditure as well as boost the investment in the Indian economy. So, this article highlights that the government is wrongly focusing only on the supply side factors without taking into account the demand side factors. And both these factors are interrelated and interdependent because the investment rates cannot pick up unless the demands for goods and services are increased, which are directly related to the consumption expenditure in India. So, in this background, let us understand what is consumption expenditure in India, what are the reasons for decline in the consumption expenditure, why the government's response is not proper, and what the government should do to boost this consumption expenditure in India. So, let us understand how is the consumption expenditure in India falling and what does it highlight regarding the state of Indian economy. Now, you should be knowing that the consumption expenditure in India accounts for almost 60% of the India's GDP. So, a decline in the consumption expenditure would have a greater impact on India's GDP as compared to the decline in investment rates. So, the proportion or the weightage of consumption expenditure on India's GDP rate is more as compared to the investment rates. And currently, we are witnessing a slowdown or decline in these consumption expenditures. Further, this decline in consumption expenditure is witnessed in various sectors of economy, and the main sectors which are witnessing this decline are the automobile sectors as well as FMCG products. Further, there has been decline in demand evenly for commonly used household goods like salty snacks, soaps, packaged tea, etc. Now, what does all these things highlight? So, these things highlight that the household budgets of the poor and middle class is under strain. And as the budgets of these poor and the middle class is under strain, this has forced them to cut down the expenditure on such commonly bought goods. And this lack of expenditure by the poor and the middle class is leading to a decline in the consumption expenditure in India. So after this, let us understand what are the main reasons for decline in this consumption expenditure. Now, the reasons for the decline in consumption expenditure which have been highlighted by the author mainly include: first is the lack of inclusive growth, second are the wrong government policies, and third important factor is the agrarian distress. So first, let us understand how is the lack of inclusive growth impacting the consumption expenditure in India. So in this regard, the author explains that inclusive growth is quite critical for sustaining the higher consumption expenditure. However, in the past, the growth trajectory in India has benefited only a small section of India's society. And this has led to increased income inequalities. So this means that only a upper section of the society is benefiting from the growth story of India. And this growth has not dispersed to the poor and the middle class or the marginal sections of the society. Further, a recent survey released by NSSO has said that the unemployment levels have increased in India. And these increase in unemployment levels have reduced the income levels of the people. So the income inequality and the unemployment levels are one of the factors for decrease in the incomes of people. And as the incomes of people is decreasing, this is leading to a decline in the consumption expenditure. Secondly, the author has highlighted that the government policies like demonetization and the goods and services taxes imposition has adversely impacted the informal sector. And regarding the informal sector, you should note that it employs majority of the India's workforce. Now, as majority of Indians are employed in the informal sector, this has reduced the demand and is adversely also impacting the investment by the formal sector. Now, as the investment by the formal sector is declining, it is leading to poor job creation, and as there is poor job creation, there is low income levels of the people, and this is leading to low demand. And all this has led to a vicious economic cycle, which means that all these factors are reinforcing themselves and cumulatively they are leading to a decline in the consumption expenditure. Now, as we all know that the agriculture sector in India is presently going through a period of distress. And this has mainly been due to the structural problems in the Indian agriculture. Now, although the government has come out with various policies, but they have not reflected their results. And this is leading to poor income levels of the farmers, and this has led to a reduced demand for goods and services in the rural areas. So, all these three important factors have led to a decline in the consumption expenditure, and which was mainly responsible for slowdown in Indian economy. And all these factors are the demand side factors which are leading to a slowdown in the Indian economy. Now, after this, let us analyze how good is the response of the government for controlling this slowdown, which mainly focuses on the supply side factors only. Now, highlighting the response of the government in controlling this slowdown, the author has said that the response of the government has been poor. And the author further explains that the government has wrongly focused on the supply side measures in order to enhance the investment rates. Now, as we all know that recently the finance minister has unveiled a number of measures to boost the Indian economy. And those measures were discussed in the previous DNS video. However, most of these measures emphasize on increasing the investment rates, which are mainly the supply side factors. Further, the government has decided to infuse rupees 70,000 crores into public sector banks to increase the credit creation and investment rates in Indian economy. However, the author is skeptical and says that it may not lead to higher investment rates because the private sector is reluctant to invest due to lower demand, as we have discussed in this article. Also, the government has decided to exempt the foreign portfolio investments from the higher surcharge which was imposed in the budget of 2019. Even on this front, this is unlikely to have any effect because it would not boost the demand in the Indian economy. So the author mainly highlights that there is lack of demand, and this demand side has to be focused by the government rather than focusing only on the supply side factors. So after this, let us understand what are the key suggestions by the author to handle this situation and how to boost the demand in India. So finally, what steps should the government take in order to control and boost the demand side in Indian economy? So in this regard, the author has suggested that the Union Budget of 2019 has not provided any fiscal stimulus to address the problem of demand in India. Now, fiscal stimulus simply means the government should increase its investment in various sectors which are likely to boost the demand in the Indian economy. And one of the suggestions of the author in this regard is that there should be massive increase in public expenditure in the rural areas, particularly on the NREGA or the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Now, what would such an expenditure do is that such an enhanced expenditure would have local multiplier effect in the form of creation of employment opportunities. And once these employment opportunities are there, it will lead to higher income levels and will consequently boost the demand in Indian economy. So all these are interrelated. So the government should focus and increase its investment in those areas which are likely to boost the demand in Indian economy. So after going through this article, you should try and answer this question from your mains examination point of view. And with this, let's move to the next article. Now, this article on page number 10 talks about the importance of maintaining the credibility, independence and autonomy of the institutions in a market economy, which is very critical and important for promoting economic growth and development. So this article will fall under General Studies paper 3 under the topic economic development. So in this article, let us try and understand the role of the institutions in a market economy, what are the reasons for present economic slowdown, and how the government has undermined various institutions. Now, the market economy is dependent upon a number of pillars, and a large role in the market economy is played by the private sector, promotion of competition, free flow of authentic official data, and enhanced efficiency in various sectors of the economy. And one of the important prerequisites for the success of this market economy is the need to ensure independent and autonomous institutions which strengthen these pillars of private sector, competition, free flow of authentic official data, and increased efficiency in the various sectors. And a key role in the Indian economy is being played by the Reserve Bank of India, that is RBI. Secondly, the National Statistical Office, which plays a key role in providing authentic data, and also by the Niti Aayog. Now, as far as RBI is concerned, it plays the most important role of regulating the banking sector. And we know that it has played a crucial role when the banking sector is facing the problem of non-performing assets. Further, the RBI facilitates competition and ensures that banks work efficiently, which will further lead to higher economic growth. So, RBI plays a key role by regulating the banking sector, and by promoting and regulating this banking sector, the RBI aims at achieving higher economic growth for India. Secondly, the National Statistical Office publishes various kinds of official data, for example, GDP estimates, employment data, etc. And this enables the private sector to make optimum decisions about their sector. And finally, the Niti Aayog facilitates the private sector investment by laying down long-term strategic vision and creating conditions which are conducive for overall economic growth and development. For example, recently Niti Aayog had released a report on artificial intelligence, and this had set the stage for long-term strategic vision of the government of India regarding the disruptions which will be caused by the artificial intelligence, and also what are the requirements of skilling in terms of labor so that this does not create a problem of unemployment. So these are few important roles which are played by the Reserve Bank of India, the National Statistical Office and the Niti Aayog. Now, as far as the present economic slowdown is concerned, most of the economists and policymakers have attributed this recent economic slowdown to the decline in consumption expenditure and investment rates, as we have seen in the previous article. However, the author has analyzed that the root cause of present slowdown is politicization and loss of independence and autonomy of various institutions, for example, the RBI, NSO, and the Niti Aayog. So the author asserts that the government has undermined institutions, which has in turn led to the decline in consumption expenditure and investment rates, and which is the primary reason for economic slowdown in the Indian economy. Now, how has the government undermined various institutions? And mainly the article deals with the autonomy and politicization of RBI, National Statistical Office, and the Niti Aayog. Now, as far as RBI is concerned, the government has undermined the credibility of RBI through demonetization and asking the RBI to transfer its surplus reserves. Now, the issue of surplus reserves has already been discussed in a previous DNS video. Now, as far as demonetization is concerned, various experts have said that the RBI was not consulted on this decision of the government of India. Further, the role of RBI has been confined only to inflation targeting, and here the RBI has been mandated to maintain a rate of inflation of about 4% only, which could either increase or decrease by 2%. So this means that the focus of RBI has mainly been on inflation targeting only. Now presently, as the inflation in India has slowed down and it has reduced from 4% to presently 2% only. So the Indian economy is presently witnessing for past few months a low inflation as well as low GDP growth rate. Further, as we know that the RBI is responsible for the monetary policy and which has an impact on the investment in the economy, and this is decided by the RBI based on various policy rates like the repo rate and the reverse repo rate. However, even when the RBI knew that the inflation in India is falling down, the RBI did not take measures to increase the liquidity or the lending scenario in India by reducing the policy rates or the repo rates, etc. commensurately. So this shows that the RBI was reluctant and ignorant and mainly focused only on the inflation targeting, which was already comfortably within the limits which have been set by the Monetary Policy Committee. And the RBI did not show any initiative for reducing the repo rate, etc. to boost the growth in economy. So this shows that the RBI has not been functioning efficiently and has not been assisting the growth of Indian economy. And this was one of the major reasons for slowdown in the Indian economy according to the author. Secondly, as far as the National Statistical Office is concerned, which has the responsibility of releasing authentic data regarding the Indian economy, the government did not give the permission to publish the periodic labor force survey. And this periodic labor force survey reflects upon the problem or the issue of unemployment rate in India. Now, the latest report had showed that the unemployment rate in India increased to about 6.1%, which was the highest in last 45 years. And the government initially did not give the permission to publish this report of the National Statistical Office. Further concerns have been raised with respect to the GDP estimates due to the presence of large number of shell companies in the MCA 21 database. Now, this MCA 21 database is a database of major companies in India, and it has the problem of large number of shell companies in it, which overestimates the GDP data which is released by the National Statistical Office. So the National Statistical Office has not done enough to allay these fears of inauthenticity of the data of GDP. So in this regard, the author suggests that the market needs authentic and genuine information to make the investment decisions. However, a failure of the official machinery to provide such kind of information may in turn hinder the investment decisions by the private sector. So for example, if the NSO had released the PLFS report or the periodic labor force survey report on time, it would have promoted higher investment from the private sector due to lower labor costs, and which was a result of increasing unemployment scenario in India. So the private sector could not take decision on time regarding the opportunity which was provided by the falling employment, which is leading to the fall in the labor prices. Further, regarding the Niti Aayog, the author says that the main reason for replacing Planning Commission with the Niti Aayog was to enable the institution to act as a system reforms commission. And the Niti Aayog was required to carry out critical analysis of various government schemes and programs so as to enhance the efficiency of government expenditure. And if you go through the difference between the Niti Aayog and Planning Commission, you should note that the Planning Commission had the power of allocating finances to various schemes of the Government of India. However, that power has been taken away from the Niti Aayog. Also, the Planning Commission provided various 5-year plans for the roadmap of Indian economy. However, the Niti Aayog, which was supposed to be critical of the government's schemes and programs and was supposed to be responsible for providing improved inputs for increasing the efficiency of Government of India, it has failed to do so and has been mainly towing the line of the government, and it is not involved in the critical analysis of these schemes of the Government of India. So the author says that the Niti Aayog has failed to come out with well-researched documents to carry out such an exercise. So in this regard, the author says that there is a need to understand as to what factors have led to the undermining of these institutions, and accordingly there is a need to address all these factors. And ultimately, there is a need to restore independence and autonomy of these institutions to promote growth and development, which are critical for economy under the market principles. So these were few points highlighted by the author. Now, this news article on page number 7 is related to the upcoming assembly elections in the state of Maharashtra and Haryana. And the elections for both these states have been announced recently. So in order to monitor the activities in the cyberspace or the cyber activities for the upcoming elections in these states, the Election Commission of India will set up a dedicated cell to monitor the activities on social media platforms. And this cell will watch out for such uploads on social media which violate election norms, and this will be done by scanning all the mediums like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. So this will fall under General Studies paper 2 under the topic Polity and Governance. Now if you look at the previous year questions in the year 2017, there was a question which read, to enhance the quality of democracy in India, the Election Commission of India has proposed electoral reforms in 2016. So what are the suggested reforms and how far are they significant to make the democracy successful? So any such changes or new features which are introduced by the Election Commission of India in the elections become important for us from exam point of view. Now as far as this news article is concerned, you can use the points that we will discuss here in writing questions related to the steps undertaken by Election Commission to check the misuse or violation of social media. So in this, let us look at what will the cyber cell monitor, and secondly, there is a voluntary code of ethics which has been adopted by the Internet and Mobile Association of India. So what are its features? So this newly created cyber cell of Election Commission of India will monitor three kinds of violations. First is that if any content which is being shared is amounting to defamation, rumor mongering or fake news. And also those instances will be forwarded to the concerned police units for further action. So it will ensure that the menace of fake news and rumor mongering is avoided during the elections on social media platforms. Further, it will report if there is any violation of model code of conduct in the posts on the social media by the election parties. Now, regarding the model code of conduct, you should note that it is created for the guidance of political parties and candidates, and these include set of norms which have been evolved with the consensus of these parties only. And all election parties had agreed to abide by these principles of model code of conduct. Now, this model code of conduct is invoked as and when the elections are announced. And regarding the details of MCC, you can go through today's PDF where it has been provided. Thirdly, it will monitor those posts which might give rise to law and order problems, and in case they will be removed from the internet. So this will monitor three kinds of violations, which will include rumor mongering, defamatory and fake news which are being shared on the social media platform. And these complaints will be forwarded to the police stations. Secondly, it will report as to which all posts on the social media are violating the model code of conduct, and also those posts which are creating law and order problems, and these posts will be removed. Further, this cell will also scan the social media posts by the citizens, and those posts which are drawing attention to the willful violation of model code of conduct by the candidates, their supporters, etc., and which will also include those posts which are inciting votes or are leading to intimidation to the voters to vote for any particular party. So all those posts by the citizen which are highlighting election malpractices will be monitored by this cell. So this is one of the important initiatives by the Election Commission of India to control the menace of fake news, rumor mongering and misuse of social media during the election process in India and the state assembly units. Now in this context, the Internet and Mobile Association of India, on behalf of all the members, has agreed to observe a voluntary code of ethics. And this code will be followed in the upcoming elections of Haryana and Maharashtra legislative assemblies and has also been followed in the general elections. So what are the key features of this voluntary code of ethics which has been adopted by the Internet and Mobile Association of India, or the IAMAI? So the first thing is that the social media platforms will voluntarily undertake information, education and communication campaigns. And this will focus on building awareness about various electoral laws and various violations, and will also spread various instructions related to the elections in these states. Secondly, the social media platforms have created a high priority dedicated grievance redressal channel. And this grievance redressal channel will take actions on all those cases which are reported by the Election Commission of India and are violating the model code of conduct or various concerns which have been raised by the Election Commission in this regard. Further, these social media platforms and Election Commission of India have developed a notification mechanism, and by which Election Commission can notify relevant platforms of potential violations of the Section 126 of the Representation of People Act 1951. And this Section 126 deals with the prohibition of public meeting during the period of 48 hours before the commencement of voting. Further, the social media platforms will ensure that all the political advertisements on their platforms are pre-certified by a committee which is known as the Media Certification and Monitoring Committee. And this was created on the directions of Supreme Court of India. And finally, The code of ethics says that the participating platforms or all those social media platforms which are participating are committed to facilitate transparency in paid political advertisements, which will include their pre-existing disclosure technology for these advertisements, which means that all the paid advertisements on the social media platforms will first be pre-certified and will be notified to the Election Commission of India. And this is because these expenses on social media posts will be included in the election expense of a particular candidate. So these are few points regarding the newly created cell by the Election Commission of India for monitoring the social media platforms in the upcoming elections. And secondly, there is a voluntary code of ethics which is related to this, so these points can also be important. So all these points can be used in answering questions related to the electoral reforms introduced by the election in the present year. And this will be similar to the question which has been asked previously in the year 2017. Now, after today's discussion, you should try and answer these questions, and the answer for them will be displayed after 5 seconds. The first question reads, the Chabahar port, which is being developed by India and Iran, is located in which of the following? So as we have learned in today's article, it is located in the Gulf of Oman. So location of strategically important places for India is important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. The second question reads, 1267 Committee of the UN recently in news deals with which of the following? So as we have learned, it deals with the sanctions on the terrorists. Now the next two questions we have taken from the previous year preliminary examinations. The first is that which of the following have coral reefs? And the options given are Andaman and Nicobar, Gulf of Kutch, Gulf of Mannar and Sundarbans. Now to solve this question, you should know that what are the favorable conditions for the growth of coral polyps which are responsible for the creation of coral reefs. And one of the important conditions is that the water should not be silty in nature. So if you note that the Sundarbans is a place where important rivers drain and rivers like Ganga and Brahmaputra drain their silt, the situation or the conditions are not favorable for the development of coral reefs. And that is why the fourth option can be easily eliminated. However, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Gulf of Mannar have favorable conditions for the growth of coral polyps, and accordingly, these have coral reefs. However, if you look at Gulf of Kutch, it is an exceptional location on the western coast of India where the coral reefs are found. And that is why the correct answer was A, that is 1, 2 and 3. The next question that was asked in the previous year in the 2015 is that in India, in which of the following types of forests is teak a dominant tree species? So correct answer here was A, that is tropical moist deciduous forests. So with this we conclude today's discussion of newspaper. Now let us take up the question for the day.